They said there was something wrong with him. Not because he growled, not because he was aggressive, but because he never changed. Day after day, he sat in the same corner, eyes calm, body still, watching people walk past as if he already knew the outcome. Children tugged their parents away. Adults glanced, hesitated, and moved on. He didn't bark to beg for attention. He didn't jump to impress. He simply waited, and in that quiet patience, he was overlooked again and again. Weeks turned into months, and the routine never changed. New dogs arrived, full of energy and hope, and left with smiling families. He stayed. Same posture, same expression, same silent acceptance. Some called him boring. Others said he had no personality. But those who truly looked into his eyes felt something unsettling there, a depth shaped by disappointment rather than indifference. Every rejection left an invisible mark. Not loud, not dramatic, but heavy. Still, he never lashed out, never demanded more. He greeted each day the same way, as if clinging to a small, fragile belief that consistency might someday be enough. In emotional dog stories, this is often the hardest truth to face, that the gentlest souls are sometimes the easiest to ignore. Caretakers noticed how he never changed his behavior, no matter how many times he was passed over. No anger, no sadness on the surface, just quiet endurance. They wondered what kind of life had taught him that this was all he could be, that asking for more was pointless, that hope should be kept small to avoid breaking. And then, without warning, something happened that shattered every assumption made about him. One moment, one choice, one unexpected connection would reveal what patients had been hiding all along. What followed would prove that sometimes the most extraordinary transformations do not come from changing who you are, but from finally being seen for who you have always been. The shelter followed a rhythm that rarely changed. Doors opened in the morning, bowls were filled, leashes clipped on and off, and hopeful eyes followed every visitor. The dog watched it all from his spot, never rushing forward, never retreating. While others pressed against the gates or barked for attention, he remained still, as if movement itself might disqualify him. It wasn't fear that held him there, but something learned long before this place. People often paused when they saw him. They read the card on his kennel. Age, breed, notes from staff. Their faces softened for a moment, then tightened with doubt. He didn't perform. He didn't sell himself. And in a world that rewards excitement, calm was mistaken for emptiness. One by one, they chose another dog, leaving him exactly where he was. At night, when the shelter grew quiet, his stillness deepened. He listened to the sounds around him, distant whimpers, restless pacing, the hum of lights overhead. He did not cry. He did not pace. He curled into himself and waited for morning, carrying his solitude with the same quiet dignity he carried everything else. Emotional dog stories often hide their most powerful moments in these silences. The caretakers noticed how gentle he was, how he accepted food with care, how he never pulled on the leash, how he leaned slightly into a hand without demanding more. But gentleness rarely stops people in their tracks. It whispers when the world is listening for noise. And so, day after day, he stayed the same, invisible in plain sight. Yet something about him lingered. Visitors would leave, but his eyes followed them long after they turned away. Not with desperation, but with understanding. As if he had already accepted the pattern. As if hope, for him, had learned to sit very still. One afternoon, a woman arrived who did not follow the usual path. She didn't rush toward the loudest kennel or bend down to greet the most energetic dog. She walked slowly, letting her gaze drift, absorbing the space rather than conquering it. When she reached his enclosure, she stopped. Not briefly, not politely. She stayed. He noticed immediately, not because she did anything dramatic, but because she didn't. She didn't call out to him. She didn't tap the gate. She simply crouched down and looked. And for the first time in a long while, someone met his stillness with stillness of their own. Minutes passed. He did not move. She did not leave. In emotional dog stories, this is often where tension lives, in the space between action and restraint. Finally, he lifted his head, just enough to acknowledge her presence. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Recognition. Not pity. Not curiosity. Recognition. She asked the caretaker about him, her voice quiet. She listened as they explained how long he had been there, how he never caused trouble, how he was often overlooked. The words settled heavily in the air. She looked back at him, still calm, still waiting, and something in her expression shifted. When the gate opened and he was let out, he did not resist. He walked beside her, steady and composed, as if he had rehearsed this moment in his mind many times but never dared to believe it would come. Yet even now, nothing about him changed. And that was precisely what made what followed so powerful. They sat together in a quiet corner, away from the noise and movement of the shelter. The dog lowered himself slowly, careful not to invade her space, his body language calm and deliberate. He did not paw at her. He did not press his head into her lap. He simply stayed close, close enough to feel, but not close enough to demand. That restraint spoke louder than any trick or command ever could. The woman noticed the way he watched her hands, not anxiously, but attentively. Every movement she made was registered, measured, trusted 1 second at a time. When she finally reached out, her fingers brushing lightly against his fur, he did not flinch. His breathing remained steady, as if he had decided long ago that if this moment ever came, he would meet it with quiet grace. Caretakers observed from a distance, surprised by how natural the connection looked. They had seen countless introductions filled with excitement, tears, and instant attachment. This was different. This was calm, grounded, real. In emotional dog stories, these are often the bonds that last the longest, built not on impulse, but on mutual understanding. She took him for a short walk outside. He walked beside her, matching her pace effortlessly. No pulling, no hesitation, just presence. People passing by barely noticed them, yet something profound was unfolding in that simplicity. He wasn't trying to prove he was worthy. He was simply being who he had always been. When they returned, the woman knelt and rested her forehead briefly against his. It was a small gesture, but it carried weight. In that instant, he exhaled deeply, a long breath that seemed to release something he had been holding onto for years. Not excitement, relief, as if his waiting had finally found its answer. The paperwork took time, but he stayed calm throughout, lying quietly near her feet. Other dogs barked as families passed, but he did not look away from her for long. It wasn't attachment born from fear. It was trust, carefully placed like something precious. Emotional dog stories often reveal that the deepest loyalty forms not in chaos, but in quiet certainty. As they prepared to leave, a caretaker clipped the leash to his collar and paused. They looked at him, then at the woman, and smiled softly. Everyone there knew this was not a spontaneous decision. This was a meeting of two souls who understood patience. When the door opened, sunlight spilled across the floor, and he stepped forward without hesitation. Outside, the world moved differently. Cars passed. Voices echoed. New smells filled the air. He took it all in calmly, staying close, grounding himself in her presence. Nothing about him suddenly transformed. He did not become playful or energetic. He remained exactly the same. And yet, everything had changed. As they walked away from the shelter, the woman glanced down at him and smiled. Not because he had finally become something else, but because he never had to. His quiet nature, once mistaken for emptiness, had become the very reason he was chosen. In stories like this, the miracle is not a dramatic change, but acceptance. Behind them, the shelter doors closed, and a space that had once held waiting now held absence. Ahead of them was uncertainty, yes, but also belonging. And in that moment, it became clear that sometimes the most powerful thing a dog can do is remain true to himself, long enough for the right person to finally see it. The first days in the new home were quiet, almost eerily so. No cages, no echoing barks, no constant footsteps passing by without stopping. The dog moved slowly through each room, observing rather than exploring, as if learning the rhythm of a place he was not yet sure was real. He chose a corner near the wall and lay down, not out of fear, but habit. Waiting had been his way of existing for so long that rest still felt unfamiliar. The woman allowed him space. She did not rush his adjustment or overwhelm him with affection. Food appeared at the same times each day. Water was always there. Her presence was consistent, calm, predictable. In emotional dog stories, This kind of stability is often the invisible bridge between survival and belonging. And slowly he began to cross it. At night, when the house settled into silence, he listened closely. The sounds were different now. Softer. Safer. His body relaxed in small increments. Muscles releasing tension they had carried for years. For the first time, sleep came without the need to stay alert. And in that sleep, something shifted, subtle but irreversible. Days turned into routines. Walks at the same hour. Meals shared in quiet companionship. He learned the sound of her steps, the way she spoke his name, the feeling of grass beneath his paws without concrete beneath it. He did not suddenly become playful or exuberant, but his eyes followed her with a new light. Not expectation, belonging. The most remarkable changes were the ones that could be missed if you weren't looking closely. The way he chose to lie closer each evening. The way his tail moved slightly when she returned home. The way he lifted his head when she spoke, confident now that the sound was meant for him. He had not changed who he was. He had finally been given the space to be himself. One afternoon, weeks later, something unexpected happened. As the woman sat on the floor reading, the dog stood up, walked across the room, and gently rested his head on her knee. It was a simple gesture, quiet, unannounced, but it carried the weight of everything he had endured. In emotional dog stories, this is often the moment that says more than any dramatic display ever could. She froze for a second, afraid to break the moment. Then she rested her hand on his head, slow and careful. He stayed. His breathing deepened. His body softened. This was not a dog seeking reassurance. This was a dog offering trust. And that distinction mattered more than anything. From that day on, his presence filled the home in ways that were hard to describe, but impossible to ignore. He was there in the mornings, waiting calmly. There in the evenings, lying nearby. He did not demand attention, yet his absence would have been unthinkable. The same stillness that once made him invisible now made him irreplaceable. What this journey revealed was not a transformation in behavior, but a revelation of truth. He had always been enough. He had always been gentle, loyal, and deeply aware. The world simply had not slowed down enough to notice. Until one person did. And in that recognition, a life defined by waiting finally became a life defined by connection. Not because the dog changed, but because someone chose to see value where others saw nothing. Sometimes, the most powerful endings are not loud. They are quiet, steady, and they stay with you long after the story ends. In the end, this story is not about a dog who finally learned how to change. It is about a world that finally slowed down enough to see him. His calm was never emptiness. His silence was never indifference. It was patience shaped by rejection, gentleness refined by waiting. And when someone chose to meet him exactly where he was, everything found its place without force or noise. What stays with us is the reminder that worth is not always loud. Sometimes it sits quietly in the corner, overlooked because it does not demand attention. This dog teaches us that consistency can be a form of courage, and that staying true to yourself, even when no one is watching, is not weakness. It is resilience in its purest form. There is something deeply human in this lesson. How many times do we pass by what does not immediately impress us? How often do we confuse calm with absence, or softness with a lack of value? Stories like this invite us to question what we reward, what we ignore, and what we might be missing simply because it does not shout. This dog did not need to become someone else to be chosen. He needed one person willing to look beyond movement and noise, beyond performance and expectation. In that moment of recognition, waiting turned into belonging, and quiet endurance transformed into connection. That is where the real change happened. If this story made you pause, let it stay with you a little longer. Share your thoughts in the comments. Connect with others who felt the same. And if you believe stories like this matter, consider subscribing and liking the video. Every interaction helps these quiet moments reach the people who need them most. And together, we keep reminding the world that sometimes the greatest stories speak in whispers.